It is a special Thursday, as today is, of course, October 31st. It is Halloween. You already got your Halloween special. Make sure you guys go watch that. Luigi's Mansion 3 has finally released for the Nintendo Switch, and there's some video game news I want to cover. And today we're going to talk about a couple stories that are floating around that I definitely find interesting. First off, we're going to talk about the potential for WiiWare games to come to the Nintendo Switch, because I think that's an actually interesting proposition. Then we're going to talk some stuff about wrestling, but it ties into video games, don't worry. Then we're going to talk about some PS4 system sales, and finally we're going to wrap things up with the Nintendo financial report that has some very interesting implications and a lot of cool sales data to go over. So sit back, relax, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about what's going on in the world of video game news. So the Nintendo Wii was obviously a very successful system for Nintendo, and if you had a Nintendo Wii, you of course remember WiiWare, which were digital-only purchases that were available to download. It was the first time Nintendo really sort of entered that foray when it came to their home console market, and there was a lot of cool WiiWare games, but of course as time goes on with these online services, these games tend to completely disappear. Whether they're removed or the system itself goes offline, you're unable to purchase these WiiWare games anymore as of today. And really, that's a shame, because there were a lot of exclusive games for the Nintendo WiiWare that are definitely worth checking out. We're going to go over some of those in just a minute. But what if WiiWare games were to show up on the Nintendo Switch? Yesterday, WiiWare Games, which is a company that specializes in physical releases, much like limited run games, actually sent out a very interesting tweet that has a lot of people buzzing, but not a lot of people are talking about it when it comes to the YouTube sphere. So WiiWare's tweet says the following: "What are your favorite digital-only Wii games? Asking for a mate," which definitely has a lot of people thinking that they are looking at potentially bringing WiiWare games to the Nintendo Switch, and I for one am totally on board with that. Like, the cool thing about companies like Limited Run and WiiWare Games are that they take these digital only games and then bring them to a physical copy. I don't collect every one of their games, of course. I'm just more of a pick and choose. I just get the games that interest me. Things like Night Trap, I thought that was really cool. The upcoming Turok 1 and 2, I'm still looking forward to that. The Mighty Morphin Power Rangers game that came out, but I would definitely like to see some of these WiiWare games, because there's a lot of WiiWare titles that have just been completely forgotten about. You have games like Fast Racing, which of course was Sheenan's introduction into the world of racing games on Nintendo platforms, which is a really fun game. You have the Lost Wind series as well, but the series I really want to see would be the Rebirth series. You had Castlevania Rebirth, Contra Rebirth, and Gradius Rebirth, and these three games would be absolutely fantastic to have on a cartridge. Even if they did them individually, I wouldn't care. I would be willing to pay like $40 for a physical copy of Castlevania Rebirth with an instruction manual and a nice little case and a cartridge. Like, that would just be so cool. I honestly hope that they can work something out with these WiiWare companies, because I would love to see a lot of these games get a physical release. I think that's something that people need to start thinking about as these digital services tend to disappear. So I'm completely on board for this. I hope we get some more information on it, and I definitely think we will hear more about WiiWare coming to the Switch. So you guys know I am a big pro wrestling fan, along with a fan of video games, as you guys can see with some of my merchandise designs that I've been coming up with. Buy the shirt, man! Buy the shirt! But of course, the new kid on the wrestling block is AEW. And last night on AEW's flagship television program, Dynamite, which is on TNT Wednesday nights at 8 p.m., there were a ton of video game references. And honestly, I love seeing things like this. One of their top stars is a gentleman by the name of Kenny Omega, who is a very vocal video game fan. And Kenny Omega channeled his inner Undertale last night and came out with a full Undertale-style costume, along with a cool little intro video. I'm not sure how stringent they are, like with WWE, when it comes to using their footage, so I'm going to use some GIFs. I don't really know how you say it. I always thought it was GIFs, but then you look at Jeffrey the Giraffe from Toys R Us and it's like, well, maybe it's GIFs. Damn you, Jeffrey the Giraffe! Damn you! But no, it was an absolutely awesome getup, and I'm not even really a fan of Undertale, but I thought this was really cool. And then another tag team by the name of the Young Bucks came out with a Ryu and Ken style ensemble as well. So just very cool stuff. AEW is, of course, potentially working on a video game as well. They are big fans of the N64 style engine of wrestling games, so I'm definitely hoping that we see something with that. But it was just something I thought was really cool. It's great to see, you know, video games crossing over with other genres of things, because video games are the biggest form of entertainment, yet they still have this kiddie stigma. So definitely hats off to those guys. Great program last night, and very cool video game references. Next up, for the 7 people on this channel that care about my opinion on PlayStation related stuff, the PlayStation 4 has crossed yet another milestone. This system is selling like crazy, and I could definitely see why, and that's one of the things I want to talk about. The PlayStation 4 has now outsold the Nintendo Wii and is sitting at over 100 million units sold. And a lot of people are like, wow, that's a lot of units, but I could definitely see why the PlayStation 4 has been so successful this generation, because it had one thing that the Xbox One did not, and that was killer console exclusives. Now, people like to sit here and say, well, console exclusives aren't that important anymore. You know, they're detrimental to the video game landscape, and I think that's pish posh in my opinion. Console exclusives are why you buy a console. You buy a Nintendo console because you want to play Mario and you want to play Zelda. You buy a PlayStation console because you want to play God of War and franchises like that. You buy an Xbox console because you want to play games like Halo. Now, we are seeing some integration with things like PC gaming, of course, coming into the limelight with things like Xbox and PlayStation, but I still feel like console exclusives dedicated to the console that are cross-platform play are still important to the console. Looking at the PlayStation 4 software sales, you look at their main games that sold the best, and they were all console exclusives. Huge games like Spider-Man and God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, The Last of Us Remastered. Like, these are reasons why people picked up a PlayStation 4. And when people are buying your console for your first-party exclusives, they will tend to stick with that console and then pick up subsequent third-party titles from this system. It's definitely something Xbox needs to address with the Xbox Scarlet. Xbox definitely went with the games as a service route, focusing more on multiplayer and online experiences, but obviously single-player experiences are still very important and are driving console sales. So hats off to Sony for this with the PlayStation 4 sales. It's absolutely incredible to see, and I just love seeing the video game industry doing as well as it is. And finally, late last night, we got the Nintendo financial report coming out of Japan for the latest quarter for Nintendo. And there's a lot of cool stuff in here. There's a lot of stuff I want to break down, and a very interesting comment that has me thinking some crazy things. So first off, let's talk system sales. Now, these system sales are up until September 30th of 2019 when we're talking total sales. The Nintendo Switch has sold nearly 42 million units life to date, with software sales at 246 million units. Now, the Nintendo Switch is on the verge of passing the Super Nintendo, which was around 50 million units when it comes to the Super Nintendo and the Super Famicom. Now, what's interesting is 2019 quarterly sales for the Nintendo Switch nearly doubled 2018's for the same time frame. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, of course, that's because of the Nintendo Switch Lite. But the Nintendo Switch Lite was only on the market for 10 days, of course, between September 20th and September 30th. But the Nintendo Switch Lite did make a huge impact in the marketplace. The Nintendo Switch Lite managed to move nearly 2 million units in just 10 days, but what's very interesting about it is how the landscape for handhelds has kind of shifted, because the Japanese market used to be the ones that were really propelling these handheld systems. But when you look at a breakdown of these sales figures for the Nintendo Switch Lite, it shows that the US is actually the highest selling region for the Nintendo Switch Lite. The Nintendo Switch Lite sold about 800,000 units in the US in that 10-day time frame versus about 400,000 units in Japan. Of course, the rest of the units make up the rest of the world. But that's doubling what was sold in Japan, and that's, like I said, sort of a shift, because now you're seeing the US marketplace gravitating towards this handheld console that is strictly a handheld console, much more so than the Japanese marketplace. So that's sort of showing a changing of the times. Maybe handheld gaming isn't necessarily dead in the US or worldwide like a lot of people are saying. Now we have to talk about some Nintendo Switch software sales. And Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, like, Jesus Christ, will this game ever stop selling? Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has sold over 19 million units on the Nintendo Switch. Nearly half of the Nintendo Switch owners out there own a copy of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Coming in at number 2 is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate with 15.7 million units sold. Super Mario Odyssey, one of my favorite, if not my favorite first-party Nintendo Switch games, is at 15.3 million. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is at 14.5 million. But there's actually 2 surprises that I want to talk about as well. Super Mario Maker 2 is selling very, very well. It is at 4 million units sold, and of course that was a summer release. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening in just 10 days sold 3.1 million units. Now, of course, Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch was a huge release. A lot of people were looking forward to it. I definitely enjoyed the game, a little few problems here and there, but what's interesting is when you look at the original Link's Awakening for the Game Boy, yes, that Game Boy system that sold crazy well, that game only sold 4 million units life to date. And really, there's been sort of a shift, I would say like the last decade or so, with the Legend of Zelda games. Like, Zelda games used to sell pretty well, but it definitely wasn't a top tier selling franchise for Nintendo, I feel, when you look at the grand scheme of things. But over the past decade or so, that has really changed. Zelda is now a huge selling franchise for Nintendo, and the fact that this has nearly eclipsed what the Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening did on the Game Boy, life to date, in just 10 days, it probably has already passed it. So that's definitely very crazy. Now, of course, there is additional stuff that comes out of these financial reports. There's Q&A sections, the president Furukawa speaks on some things, and we're starting to get some information out of that. And one of the gentlemen that works for the Wall Street Journal for the tech side of things in the Japan region, who constantly reports on Nintendo stuff, actually had something very interesting to say about what President Furukawa said during this financial report. So Mr. Takahashi, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name because I will butcher it, from the Wall Street Journal, said that President Furukawa said something very interesting. Nintendo chief Furukawa said the company would make more 3DS franchises available on the Switch to convey the appeal of the Nintendo Switch Lite. Now, what's interesting to me about that statement is what Nintendo 3DS franchises that were popular on the system haven't already had representation on the Switch or are getting representation. When you think of the 3DS, you probably think of the best-selling games like Mario Kart, Pokemon games, Mario games, Zelda games, all of which have representation on the Switch. Animal Crossing was a huge selling game, but that's coming to the Nintendo Switch in March. I guess maybe Tomodachi Life, but that's not really a franchise. That was just sort of a one-off thing. We can get some Rusty's Real Deal Baseball on the Nintendo Switch. That was such a weird freaking game. I kind of see this, though, as maybe opening the door for 3DS games, actual 3DS games, to be remastered and brought over to the Nintendo Switch, which is something I would really like. Now, you might remember a few days ago on the channel, we talked about a bogus Nintendo Direct rumor, but one of the things that was involved with that was a Kid Icarus Uprising 2. And Kid Icarus Uprising is a game that would definitely benefit from an HD overhaul and being brought over to the Nintendo Switch. That was a game that was very hard to play on the 3DS because of the control scheme, but having a proper control scheme on the Nintendo Switch would make that game absolutely amazing. It looked great on the 3DS, it had fun online multiplayer as well, and I think that's a game that deserves a second shot at life. So our 3DS games coming to the Nintendo Switch from Nintendo, I think there's definitely the potential there, and if it does happen, I want to see Kid Icarus Uprising be the first game out of it. Alright, so that is going to do it for today's video. I hope you guys have a happy Halloween. If you got kids, go out there, get your kids some candy. If you're a kid at heart, maybe try to get yourself some candy too. Be safe out there. Always check your candy bag. Make sure you ain't got no weirdos or something putting stuff in the candy bag. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Be sure to check out other videos on the channel. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.